Wonderful. Hello, everyone. My name is Linnea Anderson. On behalf of the First Fridays Committee and the Archives and Special Collections Department, welcome to First Fridays. And this season's theme is Matters of the Heart. And today's presentations will also be posted later on the University of Minnesota Library's YouTube channel. First Fridays is a monthly series of presentations made possible by a generous gift from Governor Elmer L. Anderson and Mrs. Eleanor Anderson in honor of former library director Dr. Edward B. Stanford. The presentations are based on materials in the University Library's archives and special collections. A special thank you to the interpreters from Middle English who will be providing ASL interpretation for today's presentation. Yes. And if time allows, we will have a question and answer time at the end. Zoom audience members, if you have any questions for our speakers today, please submit them using the Q&A function and not the chat so that we can keep track of your questions. And in-person audience, please hold your questions until the end. We will have a tour of the underground storage facility after the presentations with Chris, who's sitting over there. And at this point in the program, we will pause for a land acknowledgement. The University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. It is important to acknowledge the peoples on whose land we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with tribal nations. We also acknowledge that words are not enough. We must ensure that our institution provides support, resources, and programs that increase access to all aspects of higher education for Native American students, staff, faculty, and community. So our presentations today feature the Upper Midwest Jewish Archives, and we have a new feature, the Archives and Special Collections Central Processing Department. Yes. Yes, whenever we think central processing, we all go, yay. So the first presentation is Seeking NJB, Nice Jewish Boy, presented by Kate Dietrick, Archivist of the Upper Midwest Jewish Archives. Making a match in the Jewish community has always been something worth singing about. From how to find that nice Jewish boy or girl, to professional matchmakers, to debates over interfaith marriage. Dating while Jewish is a spirited topic. All right, Kate.
Hello. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single person in possession of Jewish heritage must be in want of someone to marry. From stereotypes of meddling mothers to musical matchmakers, seeking that nice Jewish boy or girl has been a struggle for decades. Today, I'm going to focus in on the history of Jewish dating groups that thrived in the local community prior to the internet. It was a time before swiping left or right on dating apps, a time even before online chat rooms for singles. How successful were these groups, and why were they even needed in the first place? I'll be diving into all that and more, sharing material from the Upper Midwest Jewish Archives. First, however, we need to set the scene and grapple with marriage in the Jewish community. Because when we talk about dating while Jewish, historically, the practice and the push was that if you're Jewish, you should marry someone who is also Jewish. It's not in the purview of this presentation to go deeply into the breakdown of interfaith marriage, if it's good or bad for Jewish people. It is a conversation in the community, however, so I'm going to dive a bit into it. Some statistics. A 2021 Pew Research study noted that interfaith marriages have become increasingly more common among US Jews in the past decades. 42% of married Jews indicate that they have a non-Jewish spouse. Of those who have gotten married since 2010, so predominantly younger Jews, that number increases to 61%. If you take out the outlier of Orthodox Jews, that number increases even further to 72% are intermarried. Across history, this is a new phenomenon. If you look at these two tables, you can see that more and more Jews are marrying non-Jews. Between 1900 and 1940, it was around 2 to 3%, and now it's 42%, like I said. You can imagine that these increases might be cause for concern when considering the survival of Jewish people in the United States. Here in the Upper Midwest Jewish Archives, we have a number of collections of rabbis' papers. In nearly every one of these collections, there's at least one subject file on interfaith, or sometimes termed mixed marriage or intermarriage. To give us an idea of what rabbis were thinking on this subject, I pulled subject file, interfaith marriage and child rearing from Rabbi Stacy Offner's papers. Rabbi Offner's subject file reveals the anxiety and mixed approaches and opinions that this topic brings. Pamphlets in the folder include questions Jewish parents ask about intermarriage, Reform rabbis and mixed marriage, Jews and non-Jews getting married, and preserving our heritage by embracing interfaith families. These pamphlets were put out by local and national Jewish organizations as a way to help answer questions faith leaders might have with interfaith congregants or even just concerned Jewish parents. One pamphlet put out by the American Jewish Committee notes why Jews should marry other Jews. To share in the joys of a Jewish family life, including holidays and observance, that people with similar backgrounds, values, and commitments have, on the whole, a better chance of making marriage work, and as a way to not cut themselves off from their roots and their people. It summarizes the overarching fear, quote, "The chances of one's children intermarrying are considerable, but is by no means an inevitable occurrence. Within the Jewish community, voices are calling for cultural acceptance and legitimation of intermarriage. However, we know that the overwhelming majority of the children of intermarriage themselves intermarry and evince virtually no meaningful Jewish involvement. By the third generation of intermarriage, Jewish identity has all but vanished. The chain, so well preserved over 150 generations, is broken." Finally, the pamphlet point blank addresses parents. The last one. If Judaism and the Jewish people and heritage are important to you, it is your responsibility to tell your children clearly and convincingly that intermarriage is a threat to their Jewishness and to the Jewishness of their future children. How pervasive these beliefs were and are is up for debate. But those beliefs were not held by all. Instead of denying interfaith families existed, others worked to call them in. As we saw, interfaith statistics continued to rise after that first pamphlet was published. Another pamphlet put out by Minneapolis Jewish Federation in 1999 speaks directly to interfaith families through the local Interfaith Families Task Force. Quote, "Successful outreach to interfaith families, welcoming them and encouraging them to raise Jewish children, is essential to the vitality of the American Jewish population." It goes on. "As a community, it is time to look at what can be gained by embracing interfaith families and what is lost when we don't. It might be more traditional historically for Jews to marry other Jews, but Jews marrying outside the community was a reality that should be welcomed. And Jewish children can come from interfaith marriages, of course." Yet, as we examine these rabbis' papers, the theoretical quickly morphs into the practical. Namely, was the rabbi willing to officiate a marriage between a Jew and a non-Jew? I have heard plenty of anecdotal stories in the community about which rabbis were or were not willing to officiate over the years. And again, it's outside the parameters of my research to do a deep dive into that breakdown. However, in that folder of Rabbi Offner's papers, we get a snapshot. These are lists from the 80s and 90s covering rabbis who officiate intermarriages without requiring conversion. The Minnesota rabbis on the 1986 list include Rabbi Anthony Holtz of Temple Israel in Duluth, Rabbi Norman Cohen of Bet Shalom in Hopkins, and Rabbi Lee Lerner of Mount Zion Temple in St. Paul. By 1990, that list no longer includes Rabbi Lerner at Mount Zion, as he had left the congregation, but adds Rabbi David Friedman of B'nai Israel in Rochester and Rabbi Offner in St. Paul. This snapshot illustrates that Even though the Jewish population of Minnesota was small, the rabbis willing to officiate interfaith weddings was even smaller, only 2 in the Twin Cities at this time. All of this sets the scene that for decades, there is a strong tradition of, as well as cultural push for young Jews to marry other Jews. So let's start dating. We now turn our attention to Temple Israel in Minneapolis. The year is 1975, and the seeds of what will eventually become the Jewish dating service are planted by influential Rabbi Max Shapiro, who reaches out to Jewish kids in an effort for them to meet other Jewish kids their age. He invites a few people to come together to plan something. What follows is one of my new favorite letters in the archives. Dear fellow single, do you wish your mother would get off your back about finding a nice Jewish boy or girl to go out with? Have you ever considered appeasing your mom just so she'd leave you alone? If so, have you ever wondered where you'd find such people? Or have you ever just wished there was a new place to meet new people without pressure or pretension? It goes on to say that interested parties, no mothers, gathered to plan an event for singles in their 20s and 30s at Temple Israel. A wine and cheese night was thus planned for November 30th, 1975. Dress is informal. A second letter to fellow single lets us know that the event was a success. Our first affair attracted over 30 people in spite of the Arctic weather and the agonizing Vikings loss to the Washington football team, now called the Commanders. It is hard to communicate the excitement we felt about the success of our first party, it goes on. So it's not really quite clear how successful this group was, but it launched something, and engaged young Jewish singles continued to be on the radar of Rabbi Shapiro. In late 1979, he approached someone at a bar mitzvah with his concern for the well-being of Jewish singles. That somebody was Sandy Olkin. She herself had been a widow with 3 children until she was set up with her second husband, Sheldon, by her friend, Bobby Goldfarb. Sandy and Bobby agreed with Rabbi Shapiro's concern and so believed in the success of matchmaking that together they launched the Jewish dating service that spring at Temple Israel. The January 3rd, 1980 American Jewish World newspaper announced, quote, "A Jewish dating service is being started at Temple Israel in an effort to bring Jewish single people together. This specialized personal service will match singles for dating purposes. The service will be free to the public and strictly confidential." The announcement was shared with other synagogues as well, as seen in the Bethel Bulletin from February 1980. There was even an ad placed in the Twin Cities Reader newspaper, quote, "Jewish single men 45 to 65 years, exciting new program designed for your personal choice of female companion. Don't delay, call Charlotte at Temple Israel for further information." I'm a bit confused by the phrase, your personal choice of female companion. But I have a feeling that they were just lacking in applicants specifically in that age range. And so they wanted to kind of drum up more men in that older demographic. A March letter from this said Charlotte at Temple Israel she was the organizing secretary. And she wrote that, quote, "In 2 months, we've received over 300 requests for forms, and most of them have been completed and sent back. As we can see, based on this list, the forms were sent far and wide during those first few months, and many were indeed returned. Lucky for us and for researchers, some of those completed dating forms exist in the records of Temple Israel. Now, keep in mind, these forms aren't exactly legally bound by privacy, and they're 45 years old. However, I did choose to redact identifying information because this is very public audience. The forms asked for basic information: name, address, age, status, height and weight, educational background, and special interests. To me, the most revealing part, however, is when the form asks for the 3 most important qualities you seek in a person. I admit I have not actually crunched the data in any scientific way. However, I can tell you upon flipping through all of these forms, certain patterns pop out. Women overall consistently mention similar qualities, most commonly honesty, 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 honesty. There were quite a few that also mentioned a sense of humor and being considerate. A few others that I enjoyed, this one that listed, quote, clean about his body, clothing, and way of life. I am a fanatic about my appearance, intolerant of sloppiness. It goes on, I am very fashion aware, like to be out with people, and I dance every chance I get. I prefer men 45 years and up. I'm a positive thinker, require same. The woman herself was 35 and divorced, no kids. Another, again, divorced woman in her 30s listed the quality that she was looking for was, quote, inwardly happy with a definite bent towards nonconformity. Love that for her. I hope she found her person. Now to the men. They too often list a sense of humor as something that was important to them, along with, you gotta love Jewish men, intelligence. Some mentioned wanting a partner to be knowledgeable about Judaism and the Jewish identity. But across the board, many of the men listed one thing that they were most interested in. Can you guess? Beauty and appearance. I appreciated the one that listed one, physical attractiveness, primarily the face. My favorite one among the men I found, he clearly began listing things and then he blacked them out and wrote qualities which cannot be contained in 3 words, which cannot be reduced to a formula. Again, I love that for him. I hope he too found his person. Through these applications, as well as what Bobby and Sandy knew about matchmaking and how best to pair people, they began sending people on dates. This short form was found in the records. Jewish dating service, Temple Israel, exercise all possible care in matching individuals. It is strongly recommended that male-female clients use their normal caution that they would exercise when meeting anyone new for the first time. There are no warranties, express or implied, regarding the mental stability of any of our clients. Seen here is a spreadsheet that they created to track how many dates people had gone on. As we can see, people went on 1, 2, 3, sometimes even 9 dates. Some were left entirely blank for reasons unknown. Not much else is known about the dates. Where did they go? How successful they were. But it must have been successful. In a later article written by founder Bobby Goldfarb, she noted that our results were overwhelming. 760 dates in that brief time period, which is about 3.5 months. For unknown reasons, a hiatus followed this time during which the group reassessed their direction and decided to strike out on their own outside of Temple Israel. Jewish Dating Service was then its own organization. Sandy and Bobby, eventually also joined by Marilyn Weisberg, opened their new doors in June 1980 on Weiher Boulevard, right next to the Lincoln Dell, a popular Jewish deli. They established JDS as a nonprofit with fees for the service to cover rent and the telephone bill, but they themselves did not accept personal salaries. They were in it for the joy of the match. In looking at their application form from this time, it's far more extensive than when they first began at Temple Israel. It lists new fields, including asking for character references and attitudes and goals concerning children and religion. There's even a line for, is your mother Jewish? This is, of course, important in that Judaism is matrilineal. JDS was a Jewish organization focused on finding Jewish partners for Jewish people. The Jewish part was important to them, as the founders believed that bringing 2 Jewish counterparts together is a mitzvah, or a good deed. One article quoted Bobby Goldfarb as saying, we get about 6 calls a week from Christians, and we tell them that there's a Christian dating service listed in the daily paper. We're not being discriminatory, but we find there is a need to perpetuate the Jewish culture, and that's the reason for our services. The concept of Jewish matchmakers was a hit, both in the community and the press. Matchmaking, Jewish tradition, alive and well, read one headline. The article notes that in their first year of operation, there were already 2 weddings and 12 couples engaged. The article mentions their office setup with coffee, tea, and kosher chicken soup, as well as methods of setting people up. They listened to what people wanted, used what they called their gut instinct, and made decisions on who to best match them with. Goldfarb wrote, quote, JDS caters largely to a successful professional group of people who want to take advantage of our selective process rather than subject themselves to meat markets. On the other hand, we are not elitist. We care about all Jewish people. The first 3 years were an explosion of publicity. They were featured on the Phil Donahue Show, as well as in Life magazine, Moment magazine, and various local and national secular and Jewish newspapers. The Life magazine article, which came out in 1983, quote, visits the booming single scene in the Twin Cities. Jewish dating service was only one of the dating services that was profiled under the headline Matchmaker, Matchmaker. By this point, they were 3 years into the project and up to 29 marriages, 35 engagements, and 4 babies. It notes that Bobby's license plate reads Yenta, which translates more or less to busybody in Yiddish. Of interest is the final quote of the article. If clients do marry each other, the matchmakers seldom get invited to the wedding. A lot of people, said Weisberg, still want everyone to think it happened in the old fairy tale way. JDS did more than just fix people up to date. They also help people find friends, roommates, and connection in the Jewish community. Still, there were struggles to find applicants sometimes, as they noted some people tended to be too shy to approach JDS. The nervousness is caused by the negative image of the dating service, Goldfarb said. They think dating services are for nerds and losers. She shook her head. We don't have losers here. In 2000, 2 articles again covered JDS and their success. A Star Tribune article focused on how matchmaking was in their Jewish genes. They want to be the grandmothers of the entire Jewish population of the Twin Cities. The reason we're good, asked Goldfarb, it's a culture as opposed to doing it to make money. We're mitzvah workers, we're not business people, Goldfarb said. Just give us a phone, that's it. By this time, the statistics were even higher. Of JDS's 5,000 clients over the years, 560 had married each other for a wedding rate of about 11%. By now, they have successfully cheeky advertisements. Our men have been on the cutting edge since they were 8 days old. Meet the 3 Weissmen. Looking for tall, dark, and handsome? Willing to skip the tall part? An article noted that those slogans were payment from a client who worked in advertising. He gave us some slogans, we gave him a wife, the client, said Bobby. I have to note, when these materials were donated to the archives in the fall of 2019, I had the pleasure of meeting Bobby and her team of matchmakers. I had so much fun listening to them tell half stories and veiled stories of the matchmaking. No revealing details, no names. They would shout at each other before something specific slipped. Their clear delight for what they did all those years was infectious. The only article I could find that even remotely captured their witty vibe was a 1986 article in the American Jewish World with this very quick exchange. You think they have anything in common, or is she too yuppie-ish? Asked Olkin. He won't take out anybody who doesn't love cats, said Goldfarb. After nearly 30 years, the business closed their doors in 2009. Their formal businesses of matchmaking as Jewish dating service had ended. However, the 2009 email announcing the close of their business pointed to another organization, Jewish Singles Collaborative, which is where we turn our attention next. Jewish Singles Collaborative appears to have sprouted from a 1996 Singles Task Force report conducted under the Minneapolis Jewish Federation. The executive summary of the report explained how the Commission on Identity and Continuity, quote, selected the singles population as one to be intensively studied because of the growing concern over rising intermarriage rates, awareness of the sense of alienation felt by many singles, and interest in ensuring continuity of the Jewish people. Again, we see this theme. The 30-page report came to the conclusion that a new group should be created to reach the entire singles population. Thus, the Jewish Single Collaborative began. Though not explicitly a dating group, they spelled it out pretty clearly, one of the goals of the group, when they mentioned growing concern over rising intermarriage rates. If you get all the single Jews to hang out together, maybe there would be less of that intermarriage. Eventually, various local Jewish organizations across Minneapolis and St. Paul helped foot the bill of Jewish Singles Collaborative. With a mailing list of over 2,200 people ranging from their 20s to their 50s, the group tried to connect single Jews to the larger Jewish community and create greater involvement. A 2003 document talks about the general purpose of the group, so singles can get to know each other and build friendship, with a large pool to draw from, as 32% of Jewish adults in Minneapolis were single, while 35% of Jews in St. Paul were single. Over 500 people attended their social programs that year. So what did the group do? They did a lot in the 90s and 2000s. Their newsletters were filled with opportunities: swing dances, cardio boxing classes, outdoor clubs, Shabbat dinner, and Jewish-themed parties, including Passover and the popular disco dreidel for Hanukkah. Survey results demonstrate the success of the group, including the pinnacle quote, "I have met someone through JSC and we've been dating for several months." Interestingly, a number of survey results, especially from the younger crowd, mentions that they want more speed dating. Speed dating, it seems, was quite popular. In 2003, 300 Jewish singles aged 21 to 65 met through 8 speed dating events that year. The speed dating events targeted various ages and had a minimal cost associated to attend. Also, before I began looking into this history, I didn't know this. Did you guys know that that speed dating is Jewish? The whole concept as we know it now, and the organization Speed Dating, capital S, capital D, began with a group of Jews in Los Angeles who, surprise, surprise, wanted to encourage single Jews to date other single Jews. In the Jewish Single Collaborative material that we have, which are found with the St. Paul Jewish Community Center records, there is an officially branded speed dating manual telling leaders how to run the program. As the facilitator sets up the event, right away, page 2, we see how to handle phone inquiries. Quote, "Speed dating is a non-pressured and exciting way to meet new great Jewish singles. The program is designed for non-observant single Jews. It encourages the organizers to ask attendees if they are Jewish. If they're not, they note the person is not eligible to participate in speed dating, and encourages the organizers to respond, quote, 'We are an organization committed to Jewish continuity. At this time, we are dedicating our resources completely to fulfilling that goal.'" In the collection, we have a handful of the speed dating rating sheets filled out. Again, these are 20-something years old. The information isn't particularly private, but I did redact full names. It's really fun to see. Some of the men, like David here, were not picky, giving all of his dates yeses on if he'd date them again. Jeff, not so lucky, he only gave 1 yes to Amy. Bonnie, a complete strikeout with all no's. Meredith here had a bit more success with 3 yeses, although note, she said yes to Jeff while Jeff said no to her. Alas. Jewish single collaboratives did not appear to have the marriage track record that Jewish Dating Service had, which makes sense. They weren't specifically a dating service, despite clearly wanting to encourage dating among Jewish singles. The group is no longer active, but similar groups exist in both Minneapolis and St. Paul, affiliated with Jewish Federation. And one group is YALA, which stands for Young Adult Leadership Action. YALA also means let's go in Hebrew. These groups are geared towards young Jews, and they still have events and parties to bring people together, but appear to have dropped the established goal of matchmaking young couples. Finally, I want to end on a personal note because I don't want my lighthearted tone to be misconstrued as unkind or judgmental, particularly since this topic hits close to home. First off, I'm someone who married a Jew and converted to Judaism myself. I understand the fragile conversations around interfaith marriage and raising Jewish children, and I respect it. Furthermore, we met online during a time when online dating was just starting to lose a bit of its sense of shame before apps like Tinder exploded the scene. Kate Hart's NY met Cooley High 89 on OkCupid, And though I wasn't immediately charmed by his opening line about liking dive bars, what I did appreciate was that we had a high percentage match rate based on questions we answered. We met, fell in love, and eventually married thanks to modern day matchmaking. The world is so vastly different from when these dating groups started pre-internet. Bobby Goldfarb of Jewish Dating Service wrote in those early years of their goals. Our goal for the future includes the establishment of a national network system whereby Jewish singles would have more options to date the people of their choice. That goal explicitly came true nationally in the form of JDate, a national Jewish dating service online. Other secular dating services, though they may not cater specifically to Jews, still allow single Jews to find each other more readily through apps. And local matchmaking appears to be making a comeback. A newly formed volunteer organization called Old School Jewish Matchmaking began on Facebook for the 60-plus Jewish crowd. They just announced a new partnership with TC Jewfolk. When the group first got off the ground, who did they consult with? Bobby Goldfarb of Jewish Dating Service. Matchmakers are clearly still making their match. Thank you.
All right. Our second presentation today is Unrequited Love, Looking at Love and Loss in the Archives. And this is presented by Rachel Weiher, Project Archivist, and Amy Gabbert-Montag, Project Assistant Archivist from our Central Processing Department. And Rachel and Amy will share a fascinating exploration of unrequited love. And this presentation delves into a curated collection of poignant letters of rejection, heart-wrenching breakups, and other personal correspondence that illuminate the complexities of unreciprocated affection and prompt reflections on love's universal struggles.
Happy pre-Valentine's Day. Hello, my name is Rachel Weiher,
And I'm Amy Gabbert-Montag.
and we work as archivist in Central Processing. Central Processing is a unique unit in archives and special collections as it works with all 16 individual archival repositories. In Central Processing, we work to accession, inventory, and process high-priority collections. So as you can guess, we have had the privilege of seeing and working with many archival collections. The theme chosen for this year's First Fridays was Matters of the Heart. And our presentation is called Unrequited Love, Looking at Love and Loss in the Archives. But before we get into the specifics of our presentation, the what, the who, the where, and the drama, let's talk about the collections that we work with. We work with a variety of items in Central Processing, though some of the most common documents that we work with is correspondence. Before diving into these letters, we would be remiss if we did not talk about the issues that exist within taking ownership of correspondence. The foremost issue being consent. To start at the very beginning of accessioning a collection, who is consenting for us to have correspondence? At times, collections are donated by the family of the individual, and the original creator cannot directly consent to allow us to have their papers, as they are usually deceased. The issue of consent is not a new one, but one that has been discussed in archives at length, and something that we will not have time to fully go over today. In some cases, as it pertains to this presentation, we have direct consent from both individuals who knew their work would end up in the archives. And in other cases, especially our older examples, it is impossible to obtain direct consent, and it is unlikely that they knew their work would be available to the public. The second issue that we have with correspondence is that we usually only see one side of correspondence, the respondent's letter, which leaves us as archivists to fill in the blanks. Therefore, correspondence is inherently ethically gray. We only have one side's permission, one side's perspectives. So why is correspondence so important in the archives? In the case of our presentation, it allows us to take on a storytelling approach. Correspondence tells a story, however one-sided and sometimes with skewed perspectives. It is a window into a time and place that can shed light on important historical and cultural lived experiences. So today, in utilizing correspondence, we have 4 different stories to tell you.
So why, you may ask, would we want to discuss such an unpleasant topic like unrequited love? For a couple of reasons. Rejection is a universal human experience, whether it's romantic or platonic or familial. We can examine the different ways folks have handled breakups. We see different methods of coping. There's resilience and despair. Responses range from dramatic to detached. Relationships fizzle, others ghost. Some employ logic, others prefer to spar and use hostile and cutting language. There is respect and caring and a whole lot of passion in the mix. We also learn about the ways in which the current economic, political, and cultural norms play a role in relationship dynamics. What is happening in the broader social context has an impact on all kinds of relationships. So let's explore different types of rejection and individual responses through these 4 stories. Perhaps you'll find a story that resonates with you and your own experience. Our first story comes from the Robert Bly papers in the Upper Midwest Literary Archives. Thank you to the curator, Erin McBrien, for her expert insight into the Blys. Minnesota-born Robert Bly, poet and essayist, met Carol Bly, an award-winning writer known for her short stories, at Wellesley on a blind date. They married in 1955 and lived a truly literary life, allegedly banning the television and regularly hosting poets in their home. Their courtship is documented through love letters in the Robert Bly papers. We have quite a few sweet anniversary cards, like the one you see here from Carol to Robert, in which she emphasizes that the sentiment in the card is true. It's all true. And we also have this drawing of a rose that's signed with love from Carol. That comes from 1963. Well, things started to go sour in the 70s. Robert, it turns out, had been having a long-standing affair with a woman he later married, Ruth Ray. While this is not the sole reason for the dissolution of their marriage, it was the straw that broke the camel's back, and the couple decided to divorce. Now, no-fault divorce became lawful in Minnesota in 1974, meaning that couples did not have to prove infidelity or abuse to dissolve a marriage. It was enough that you just didn't want to be married anymore. Given that divorce was a relatively new thing, Robert and Carol were in many ways writing a new script on how to deal with divorce, raise kids, and do this all as celebrated writers. Robert alludes to this in a letter to Carol on October 24th, 1989, expressing his disgust over her comments about their relationship to the Utne reader. He says, "I want to remind you that in the 9 years that we have been divorced, I have never said a word that would diminish your reputation nor your dignity. Among divorced people, there is an unspoken but civilized line around discretion and respect. You have crossed that line in a serious way with your attack in the Utne reader. Beyond that, you have offered up our lives for gossip, which diminishes the dignity of both of us and the dignity of the children. When you behave in this way, we cannot go on as if nothing had happened. If you have something to communicate to me in the future, you should do it through a third person, perhaps a lawyer." According to Robert, divorced people were to be discreet and at the very least perform civility, not air their grievances to the media. Carol does not take this lying down. 4 days later, she writes back, referring to her comments to Utne, saying, "It's not personal. Don't make it be. And don't preach about the honor code of divorced people. Absurd. I heard you dressed out the Utne reader people for breaking up our home. You broke it up years ago. Don't be absurd." In this letter, she also cites that Robert's leadership in the men's rights movement was the focus of her comments, and also states that she did not know that they would be publishing those comments. After penning that first letter, it appears that Carol had a little more to say. In the letter, there's a letter dated later, 10/28/89. She goes on to tell Robert, "I am rather detached about you." Ouch. Now, to make things a little trickier, Robert and Carol had many friends in common. Not only were they connected to people through their 25 years of marriage, but also their profession. One of those mutual friends was Don Hall, also an acclaimed poet. Robert and Don were especially close, and they supported each other in all aspects of their lives. But things started to get a little rocky when the divorce news breaks. Robert writes to Don seeking validation from his best friend, but doesn't get what he's looking for. Don tells it like it is, occasionally taking Carol's side, and tells Robert that he is in the wrong. For example, in February 1978, soon after the Blythes decided to divorce, Don wrote to Robert, "God, this is tiresome. I write you a letter and you mail it back with insults scrawled in the margin. You tell me that my letters are evasive, condescending. If that is how they seem to you, I know precisely why. I'm humoring you." Don tells Bob that Bob's model of friendship is obedience. "I will not tell you that you are right all of the time. For this, I get insults, I get rage. Your letters are melodramatic, grand opera, and they are whining. Stop it." He signs off the letter with love and anger, Don. So, despite all the disagreements and spite, the story does have a happy ending. Robert and Don patch up their relationship and they remain really close friends. And while it might not have been the happy ending that Carol and Robert envisioned when they wed, they did work it out and figured out a new way to relate to each other and successfully co-parent their children. In fact, Robert had this to say about Carol at the news of her passing in 2007, saying, quote, "She was a light, a fire for all those people wandering around on the prairie. She was an excellent mother and a terrific friend of writers and of writing." Not a bad eulogy from your ex-husband.
Not bad at all. Moving on to the Upper Midwest Jewish Archives, courtesy of Kate Dietrick, who we just heard from, is where we will look at the seemingly steamy relationship between Arthur Eisenberg and Elaine Feller. Arthur was the son of Frank Eisenberg and Sarah Brooks. He was born in 1926 and grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Immediately after graduating high school, Arthur enlisted in the Navy, probably around 1944. The first correspondence we have between him and Elaine began on July 20th, 1944 at exactly 11 p.m. Elaine writes, "Dearest, I just got home from a very unexciting trip of joyriding. To find that you had called me a short while ago. Honestly, Art, I felt so miserable and still do. I can hardly wait to hear your old familiar hello, or is Elaine there, or maybe hi, hun, love and stuff, Elaine." This sounds like an established relationship, especially when this is followed by years of letters and sentiments and let's see here, and drawings. Such as, "Say, Art, I really think you ought to stop giving me so many compliments on my pictures. Either you have forgotten what I look like or you are just plain homesick. But please don't degrade yourself by telling me what your buddies say about how they can't see what I see in you." There is even another man's proposal thrown into the mix. March 5th, 1945, Elaine writes, "Honey, I got a letter from Tubby today, and I don't like its contents. Believe me, dear, my letters are purely platonic, but he seems to misinterpret them to what he believes to be true. Well, in today's letter, he informed as much to say that he plans to marry me when he gets home. This isn't the first letter of this sort. This is comparatively tame. I just don't know what to do about it. I tried to sever our correspondence, but I received such a pathetic letter from him. I just don't have the heart to hurt him. Yet I know he will get hurt in the end." And of course, there is the burned love letter sent on March 31st, 1945, which reads, "My dearest darling, I'm still burning for you. Love, Elaine." So there are years of fairly passionate correspondence, at least on Elaine's end. In this case, we are lucky that we have a few letters from Arthur's perspective that were written to his parents. On June 20th, 1945, just months after the letter from Elaine, Arthur writes to his father, "To get back to Elaine, believe me, we aren't engaged. We don't go steady. Yet we're fond of each other. I don't plan on getting married for at least 4 to 5 years. A lot can happen in that time. To repeat a saying I've said for quite a while, women are like stunt cars. There's always another one around the corner." Yikes. Now I want to talk about an interesting phenomenon in World War II, one that I'm sure everybody has heard of, the Dear John letter. This was a letter sent by a woman breaking up with a serviceman abroad. Some contemporaries at the time argued that this was the most catastrophic injury a soldier might incur. But what about when the circumstances were reversed? And what was a woman's role in writing servicemen during World War II? What was the cultural significance of writing letters to men fighting in war? Women symbolized the home front, and much more than that, they were actually instructed by wartime state to continue writing soldiers. It was considered part of their patriotic duty. So was Elaine just doing what she felt was right? Is our perspective of their situationship skewed by our own worldview? In the late 1980s, Bryant University professor Judy Bartlett-Lifkoff launched a nationwide search for letters written by civilian and military women during World War II. That search resulted in an archive of over 30,000 wartime letters written by United States women, which showcased the importance of women in the war effort and the impact these letters had emotionally on people fighting. Now, we cannot know what happened between Elaine and Arthur, besides the fact that we know they did not end up together. What we do know is that they maintained regular and often communication throughout World War II. Our thoughts as archivists? Maybe their communication faded after the war, or maybe Arthur broke it off with Elaine, or perhaps Elaine met someone else. Regardless, we do know that Arthur married someone else, and we cannot find information about Elaine. But their correspondence survives as a picture of wartime love. Arthur died at age 27, January 27th, in 1953 of spinal meningitis. The correspondence that we have preserved between him and Elaine is funny, loving, sometimes questioning, and compassionate. Let's go even further back in time. This story is brought to us through the Immigration and Research History Center archives thanks to Maura Kunin. And man, it was a blast reading these letters. Picture it. It's the early 1890s. Italian immigration to the United States is peaking. By 1920, more than 4 million Italians have gone through Ellis Island and landed on the shores of New York. These Italian immigrants came from all over Italy, as opposed to early immigrants who primarily immigrated from the northern regions. These immigrants usually stayed in close contact with relatives in the old country and built strong communities within America. It was no different from Alessandro Siska, who was also known by the pseudonym Riccardo Conefiro. He was born in 1875 in the Cosenza province and immigrated to America in 1892, where he founded the literary journal La Foglia with his father and brother. He was requested to speak often at various Italian organizations, especially labor groups. However, as a result of his intense socialist and anti-clerical views, he was imprisoned several times. His first wife, Anita Belli, and their 2 children died tragically within a 2-year period between 1897 and 1898. The correspondence we are highlighting begins in 1899 with his future wife, Lucia Fazio. The correspondence we have translated and transcribes begins soon after the death of his wife and children, though the spicy correspondence suggests an earlier relationship. The following correspondence is passionate and perhaps toxic. The poetical language suggests an intense relationships, fiery and sometimes threatening, that seems to align politically to what Alessandro expressed throughout his literary career. It also showcases early hookup planning, 19th century style. December 11th, 1898, Lucia writes to Alessandro, "I curse the day that you arrived from Boston. I curse the day that I learned to trust you. I, who had sworn to myself never to tell how my heart felt about you. It's been this way not for one day nor 5 months, but for 3.5 years long. I have had these saintly feelings for you. I felt almost happy to love you secretly, to cry, to feel jealousy, to feel like I was going crazy, to feel, in short, an indescribable torment. This is the last letter I'm writing you. I beg you to return my letters and not to speak to anyone about me. I ask this for the honor of your family. Live happily, and I hope you meet a woman who will make you a happy man. Though it will be far easier apart. Don't forget my words of advice, as they are the words of a sister." The letter was also found with a note that reads, "Come at exactly 2 o'clock and come by First Street. Because if my brothers are home, I'll leave with an excuse. Therefore, come by foot. If you're coming, stay on the sidewalk at the fruit stand. If you don't see me, I'll be alone at home. I'll go out if they are home. I beg you not to drink tonight. Go straight home. Do me this favor." And 3 months later, March 7th, 1899, she writes, "I want to open my heart to you, a heart that is inexorably tormented from this curse. I, who thought that you were above all others. I, who had trusted you completely. I, who because of you wouldn't insult these reptiles of men. I, who had believed I had found a man who reads my soul, a man who would have loved me, respected me, comforted me. Oh, how I have been disillusioned. You treat me like nobody. Yet I forgive you, Alessandro, because I have loved you too much in order to hate you. I will hate myself and punish myself. Listen, I want to tell you something. I know you don't want to return to my home, and I won't force you to it, as long as you are happy. I will suffer for everything. I would like to continue to write you, but my heart hurts terribly." And then at the end, she writes, "If you don't mind, tomorrow wait for me at 3 p.m. on the 10th Street at the corner of Bleecher Street where the carriage passes. If tonight I don't die. Tomorrow I will be there to speak with you for the last time. Will you come? You won't be so cruel at this point, isn't that true? Receive all of my most sincerest greetings, and believe me, your dear Lucia of the past, come." I love the meetup locations at the end of each of these notes, and I wondered logistically how they would have the time to read the letter and meet up the next day. This apparently was not a problem. Lucia wrote multiple letters a day, and at the time, mail carriers delivered letters 2 times per day and up to 4 times to businesses, knowing that Alessandro had a business. So mail carriers walked as many as 22 miles a day, carrying up to 50 pounds of mail. I like to imagine the mail carriers delivering the many letters and wondering what is going on. Or here we go again, and rolling their eyes. Now, was Alessandro's letters more level-headed and calm? The answer is not really. In a letter written after they married and it's dated October 18th, 1900, Alessandro writes, "In your letter, you announced to me your suicide. Not only did you cause me enormous sorrow, upset my whole system, but you also made me spend on top of that more than $2 in telegrams. So be it. Here business has been bad. I am returning home without a dime in my pocket. I did have a few dollars left, and I bought a hat, a pair of trousers, and underwear." He ends the letter with 1,000 affectionate kisses, Ricardo. Note, I want to arrive directly at our home. I'm tired, and I long for the moment when I will be in your arms. And if you think these excerpts from these letters are thrilling, let me tell you, there is so much more. I encourage you to look up their digital translations on the Immigration History and Research website, which we will link in this PowerPoint.
Okay, our last story is brought to you by Davu Underwood Seru, curator of the Givens Collection of African American Literature. This story features two prominent Black poets, teachers, and activists, June Jordan and Ethelbert Miller. We received permission from Ethelbert Miller and the estate of June Jordan to show these letters and to discuss their relationship today. So, according to the documents that we have, Ethelbert and June started their correspondence in the early 1970s. We have pamphlets and flyers they sent to each other, articles about Black consciousness and writing, poetry festival invitations that focused on Black poetry. And it's clear that they bonded over issues of Black representation in literature and their positions as writers actively engaged in the fight for racial justice. The first letter that we have on file is dated March 1976. By this point, Ethelbert and June have established a close relationship. In this letter, June mentions that she loved the poem from Ethelbert and wanted more poems right away. She signs the letter Love, June, and includes a personal poem to Ethelbert. Now, is this relationship romantic or not? It's unclear. The letters show an abundance of love and respect for one another, but are inconclusive as to how they were defining their relationship. Some of their letters get a little flirty. This one from fall 1976, June writes that she loves the photo Ethelbert sent her, and she calls him sweetie in parentheses, and says, quote, "Just wish one could see more of your face, sir. Oops," again in parentheses. Who would have thought the parentheses could be flirty? June closes the letter saying, "You make me happy. Thank you for your love." So June and Ethelbert write to each other about once a week, sometimes more frequently, and there's evidence that they called each other on the phone. They continue to discuss their careers, current events, particularly events pertaining to the Black American experience, and they discuss deeply personal things as well. So the bulk of the collection is June's correspondence to Ethelbert, but we do have one letter that Ethelbert wrote. It's dated January 7th, 1977. He tells June, "We must be friends as well as lovers, lovers as well as friends." Ethelbert, we see clearly desires a romantic relationship with June. But what does June want? In a heart-wrenching letter dated February 1977, June writes, "Ethelbert, it seems wrong to me, and we love each other, but it is not possible that we are in love with each other. All of what we have is long distance and seldom otherwise. Indeed, trying to think clearly on this and to speak with honesty, altogether, I love you and I am not in love with you. Your love for me should not create a barrier between yourself and more love. That, it seems to me, is wrong and destructive to your life and possibly in the future. Your love gives me joy and continuous, joyful surprise, and I don't understand it really because we have been together practically not at all. Yet I do know that I love you. I love your commitment, and I love and respect your art, and I love your love. I am grateful and amazed, happily, by your love. But this is not the same as being in love. And at this distance, and given the friendish density of our respective work obligations, I do not see how that could change." Doesn't that just break your heart? June, being 14 years older than Ethelbert, taps into what she considers her best judgment and, wanting to protect their friendship, rejects his call to become romantically involved. Their correspondence remains robust for a number of years after this incident. In the 80s, their letters start to slow down to once every month or two, but still they remain really close and friendly with each other up until 2002, which is the year that June Jordan passed away. So we know that their relationship continued despite June turning Ethelbert down. So in this presentation, we have discussed the humanity behind lost or unrequited love. We've looked at divorce, war correspondence, immigration, and lost love between poets. But the archives contain an even more diverse range of stories that we couldn't account for in this short presentation. We've looked today at social and political implications, cultural impacts, and how to contextualize this information in our storytelling. So as the audience, you might be wondering, well, what is my role in this? Archival materials without an audience are inert and stagnant. In bearing witness today, you activate these stories, these individuals, and these experiences. So come to the archives. Lost love is part of life and it's documented here. You're not alone, and there are centuries of stories to be heard and brought to light. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much to all of our wonderful presenters. We are at time, so we don't have time for a question and answer session today. A couple of reminders and exhibit updates. We invite you to visit the children's literature exhibit, Journey to Joy, Rise, Relevance, and Representation. That is on the second and the third floor in the elevators on that side of the building, and also down below us on the ground floor in the Wallen Center. And the curator, Lisa Von Drasik, is around if you have questions about that exhibit. And we have a new one opening soon in the main floor gallery called Making Room that relates to women in architecture, and that is from the Northwest Architectural Archives. So the next time you come back for First Friday, there'll be a new exhibit to see. If you're interested in a tour, please connect with Chris over here, and that will go down into the underground storage facility. So thank you so much for attending, and join us again on March 7th for presentations from the University Archives and the Tretter Collection in GLBT Studies. Thank you.
We have to find him. I persuaded him into shopping for one finally. I knew they all wanted to go. Yeah, right, but I'd love to see that exhibit. Wash off. You know, now in summer, I was just asking. Yeah. Dawn. So I can walk around. It's daunting. It's so awful. Yeah. Yeah.